Naomi thought she could control her feelings, but when Elias Monroe entered her life, everything changed. Their undeniable chemistry pulled her into a whirlwind she wasn't prepared for. A night that started with a single drink spiraled into something far deeper, challenging Naomi to face her fears and vulnerabilities. Can she stop running from the truth and embrace the undeniable connection they share? Where are you watching from? Don't miss the twists and turns of Naomi's journey. Subscribe now to stay tuned for more gripping stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Naomi Hart stepped off the train with a sense of cautious hope tangled tightly in her chest. The city of Ridgefield stretched out before her, vibrant and unfamiliar. The early evening sky was melting into a canvas of warm gold and soft lilac, and the air smelled faintly of roasted street corn and the distant ocean. Naomi adjusted her grip on the worn leather handle of her suitcase, then took a long, steadying breath. This was it. A new job, a new city, a fresh start. Whether she liked it or not. She walked through the buzzing station toward the rideshare area, searching the crowd for a familiar face. Her phone buzzed in her pocket just as she spotted a petite woman waving furiously near a green hatchback. "Naomi!" Lila Bryant shouted, her short curls bouncing as she practically bounced toward her.
"Oh my God, look at you! You're finally here!"
Naomi laughed, her exhaustion cracking into something warm as she dropped her bag and opened her arms.
"Hey, Lila."
They hugged tightly, and for a moment, the chaos of the city faded into the background. Lila smelled like mint and hibiscus tea, exactly how Naomi remembered from their college dorm days. "Come on," Lila grinned, grabbing the suitcase handle. "My place is 10 minutes away. I've got wine chilling and takeout on the way. I've figured you'd be hungry and tired and also completely overwhelmed." Naomi smiled. "You know me too well." By the time they arrived at Lila's apartment, Naomi's body felt like it had been folded into an origami crane and left in someone's back pocket. The place was small but vibrant. Pops of turquoise and mustard yellow in the cushions, a bookshelf crammed with novels and half-used candles, and the scent of garlic noodles filling the air. Naomi sank into the couch and kicked off her boots with a groan. "This is perfect," she mumbled. "I might never leave." Lila set 2 wine glasses on the coffee table. "Except you have your own apartment to find. And your fancy new job starts in, what, 2 days?" "1," Naomi corrected. "Orientation's tomorrow." Lila winced. "Well, crap. All the more reason to celebrate tonight. I know a place. Live music, craft cocktails, very chill crowd. We'll go for 1 drink, toast your new life, and be back by 10, midnight, max." Naomi's head fell back against the couch cushion. "Lila." "Nope." Lila was already pulling open Naomi's suitcase and rifling through it. "You are not going to come to Ridgefield just to rot in a cubicle and sleep through your 20s. Where's that black dress I told you to pack?" Naomi groaned, covering her eyes. "I don't want to go out. I just spent 8 hours on a train. My spine is made of sandpaper, and I have exactly 0 energy for anything involving heels." "1 drink?" Lila said sweetly, holding up the dress like it was a trophy. "Just enough to remind you you're alive." An hour later, Naomi stood in front of Lila's full-length mirror, tugging at the hem of the dress. Her thick hair was pinned back in soft waves, her lips tinted a quiet berry shade, and she looked, against all odds, pretty damn good. "This still feels reckless," she muttered. "Please. You look incredible. And reckless is the point," Lila said, brushing mascara onto her lashes. "Come on. You survived your first real move. You're on the brink of a whole new life. Don't you want to mark the moment?" Naomi bit her lip. A small smile pulled at corners of her mouth. "1 drink," she repeated. Lila grabbed her purse and winked. "That's what they all say." As the cab rolled through downtown Ridgefield, Naomi pressed her forehead lightly against the window, watching the city lights blur into color and motion. Music floated from open doors, couples laughed along sidewalks, and for the first time in a long while, Naomi felt something unfamiliar, a flicker of possibility. She didn't know then that 1 drink would change everything. The lounge was nestled on the rooftop of a boutique hotel, its entrance tucked behind velvet curtains and guarded by a pair of disinterested hosts in all black. As Naomi and Lila stepped inside, a wave of warmth and rhythm washed over them. Low lighting, pulsing jazz layered with the hum of conversation, and the subtle scent of citrus and cologne in the air. Naomi paused, blinking at the unexpected elegance of it all. "Welcome to the Halo," Lila whispered proudly. "Told you Ridgefield had taste." Naomi adjusted the strap of her clutch and let her eyes roam across the crowd. Everyone looked polished, like they belonged in a magazine spread. Cocktails in hand, laughing easily, their clothes effortlessly stylish. She suddenly felt out of place, even in the black dress Lila had insisted on. "This is not 1 drink's energy," Naomi muttered under her breath. Lila rolled her eyes, grabbing her hand. "Stop fidgeting. You look like you run this city." They made their way toward the bar, weaving through high tables and clusters of people lounging on velvet booths. The bartender, tall, tattooed, with a perfectly trimmed beard, flashed them a smile. "What can I get you beautiful ladies tonight?" he asked. "Old-fashioned," Lila said with a wink. "And my friend here will have a Paloma. Trust me." Naomi started to protest, but the bartender had already begun mixing. She sighed and leaned against the bar, letting her gaze drift. That's when she saw him. He was sitting at the far end of the bar, posture relaxed yet composed, a tumbler of something amber in his hand. He wore a deep charcoal suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his frame, the crisp white shirt open at the collar. But it wasn't the clothes that caught her. It was the way he sat, still calm, like he owned the moment. Like the noise and the sparkle and the movement of the lounge all existed around him, but never touched him. Their eyes met. Naomi froze. His gaze was direct, intense, but not aggressive. Curious, like he was trying to place her from somewhere. The corner of his mouth curved into the slightest smirk, and before Naomi could even register what was happening, she looked away quickly, her face warming. Lila noticed immediately. Well, who's that?" "No one," Naomi said, too fast. "Forget it." Lila leaned around her, squinting. "You mean Mr. Tall, dark?" "And silence over there. Naomi. Come on. I'm serious. I'm not doing whatever that is. I just got here." Lila raised her eyebrows. "Did you see the way he looked at you? Like you were a puzzle he wanted to solve?" Naomi grabbed her drink and took a long sip. "That's not helpful." But the damage was done. She could feel his eyes on her again. She didn't dare look back. They found a table near the edge of the rooftop, where string lights glowed overhead and the city twinkled below. Naomi tried to focus on Lila's story about a disastrous blind date last week, but her mind kept drifting. Every now and then she glanced back toward the bar. He was still there, still watching, not in a creepy way. More like he was waiting for something. "You're doing that thing where your soul leaves your body," Lila said between bites of truffle fries. "I'm just tired," Naomi lied. Lila smirked. "Sure. You're tired and sexy and being stared at by a man who looks like he eats spreadsheets for breakfast." Naomi snorted.
What does that even mean?
"Power, money, trouble, the Holy Trinity." I'm not interested in trouble. Trouble, my dear, Lila said, raising her glass, is interested in you. Naomi rolled her eyes and leaned back, sipping slowly. The music swelled around her, the crowd thinned near their side of the lounge, and the night felt warm and alive in a way she hadn't expected. And then he stood. From the corner of her vision, she saw him rise smoothly from his stool and begin walking in her direction. One hand tucked in his pocket, the other holding his drink. Her heart skipped once, twice. "Don't look now," Lila whispered, her voice barely containing her glee, "but the Dark Prince approaches." Naomi didn't have time to prepare. By the time she looked up, he was standing at the edge of their table, eyes on her like they'd never left. His voice was low, smooth, and maddeningly self-assured. "Drinking alone?" he asked, a playful edge to his tone. Naomi lifted her chin. "Hardly. My friend just stepped away." He glanced around, clearly seeing Lila right there, but choosing not to acknowledge it. "Then I guess I'm lucky to have caught you between distractions." She should have said no. She should have told him she wasn't interested. But Naomi only smiled, half against her will. "Depends on your definition of lucky." Naomi wasn't sure how it had happened so fast. One moment, she was sipping her Paloma and insisting to herself that she'd be home before midnight. The next, she was sliding into the passenger seat of a sleek black sedan, her head warm with the glow of citrus and mezcal, and her pulse ticking like a second heartbeat beneath her skin. Elias Monroe sat behind the wheel, his hands steady, his profile cut clean by the passing streetlights. The city rolled by in golden blurs, shadows stretching long between the buildings. Naomi shifted in her seat, trying to focus, trying to remember the part where this had gone from a conversation to a decision. "You sure you're okay?" Elias asked, glancing over at her with that same unreadable calm. Naomi let out a breathy laugh and leaned her head back against the seat. "Define, okay?" He smirked, his gaze returning to the road. "You don't usually do this, do you?" "No," she admitted quietly, not even close. There was something about the way he drove, slow and purposeful, as if he knew the streets better than she knew her own thoughts. He didn't try to fill the silence. He didn't reach for her hand or make any slick comments. He simply let her sit in the quiet, in the confusion of her own making. Naomi turned to study him for a moment. His jaw was relaxed, his collarbone visible through the open top button of his shirt. He looked effortlessly composed, a man who didn't chase moments but let them come to him. That made her nervous. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "My place," he replied without hesitation. "Unless you want to go home." She didn't answer right away. The responsible part of her, the voice that usually ran her life, was screaming. "Turn around. Go back to Lila's. Take a cold shower." But the voice had been muffled by the buzz in her blood and the way Elias had looked at her, like she wasn't just another woman at a rooftop bar, but something more. She met his eyes. "Your place." That was all it took. The car pulled into a gated driveway flanked by tall hedges. The building ahead was modern and impressive, with soft lights glowing along the walkway and large windows that revealed little but hinted at wealth and privacy. Elias stepped out and came around to open her door. She hesitated, then stepped out, the click of her heels on the pavement echoing louder than she expected. Inside, the apartment was like something out of a design magazine. Polished concrete floors, sleek furniture and muted tones, warm wood accents, and a wall of glass that offered a glittering view of Ridgefield's skyline. Naomi turned slowly, taking it all in. "This is a lot," she murmured. Elias chuckled, setting his keys in a marble dish near the door. "I like quiet places that look expensive. They usually are." Naomi shot him a look. That's not an explanation. No, he said, stepping closer. It's not. The tension rose like the tide, subtle but impossible to ignore. Naomi's heart thudded in her chest as he came to stand in front of her, close but not touching. His fingers brushed lightly against her wrist. You can still change your mind, he said, his voice low. She should have. She knew that. But instead, she stepped into the space between them and tilted her head, her breath shallow. I don't want to think tonight, she whispered. That was all the permission he needed. Their lips met with a quiet hunger. Soft at first, like a question, then deepening into something bolder. Naomi's arms wound around his shoulders, her fingertips grazing the back of his neck. Elias pulled her in, his hands finding the curve of her waist, anchoring her like he'd done this 1,000 times before. The kiss broke, just for a breath, but the space between them buzzed like a live wire. This is crazy, she whispered. Yeah, he said, eyes dark and fixed on hers. But it feels good, doesn't it? It did. Too good. She didn't ask where the night was going. She didn't stop to think if it was wise. She just let herself fall. Morning light poured through the towering windows, soft and golden, warming the room like a secret the sun wasn't ready to share. Naomi stirred, her mind still hazy, her limbs tangled in unfamiliar sheets that smelled faintly of cedarwood and something distinctly masculine. For a moment, she didn't move. The ceiling above her was smooth and unfamiliar. The silence in the room was broken only by the steady rhythm of someone breathing beside her. Her eyes flicked to her right, and there he was. Elias, still asleep, his face relaxed in a way she hadn't seen the night before. His dark lashes rested against his cheek, and the light caught the edge of his jaw, sculpting it like a painting. The sheet had slipped just enough to reveal his bare chest, rising and falling with each breath. Naomi's stomach flipped. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb him. The memory of the night came flooding back in pieces, his lips, the soft jazz from his speakers, the way his hands had moved over her skin with practiced restraint. It had felt surreal, and now, under the scrutiny of daylight, it felt dangerously real. She scanned the room, spotting her dress draped over a nearby chair and her heels resting by the door like silent witnesses. Her bra dangled from the corner of a sleek nightstand, and her clutch sat unopened on a velvet armchair. Naomi pressed her fingers to her temple.
What had she done?
Today was supposed to be important. Her first day at work. Fresh start, clean slate. She had planned to wake up early, iron her blouse, run through her talking points in her head. Instead, she had woken up in a stranger's apartment, in his bed, with no time to process the hurricanes of last night. Well, not a total stranger. Elias. That was his name. But no last name. No idea where he worked. No idea where he worked. No idea what this night even meant. Sliding out of bed, she tiptoed across the room, grabbing her dress and slipping it back on with trembling fingers. Her hair was tousled, her makeup faded but not disastrous. She could pass for composed if no one looked too closely. As she bent down to grab her heels, a voice behind her cut through the stillness. Leaving already? Naomi froze. She turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. But it wasn't Elias speaking. A tall man stood near the entrance of the hallway, crisp shirt tucked into tailored pants, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand. He looked at her with amused curiosity, a slight smirk tugging at his lips. I didn't know anyone else was here, Naomi said, her voice tighter than she wanted. The man nodded once, eyes flicking toward the bedroom door. I'm Damon. I live here. Technically, so does he. We share the place, though I tend to be invisible when he brings someone home. Naomi's face flushed. She clutched her purse a little tighter. I didn't mean to intrude. I was just leaving. Damon took a slow sip of his coffee. I figured. His tone wasn't cruel, just observant. Naomi wasn't sure which felt worse. He stepped aside, motioning toward the door. Need a car, I can call one. No, thank you, she said quickly, already moving toward the exit. I'll manage. Damon opened the door for her with a casual shrug. Suit yourself. Nice meeting you. Naomi, she supplied. Realizing too late, she should have just nodded and walked out. Naomi, he echoed, as if filing the name away. Outside, the morning was cool, and the streets of Ridgefield were just beginning to stir. Naomi pulled her jacket tight around herself, her heels clicking too loudly against the sidewalk as she made her way to the nearest corner. Her thoughts raced ahead of her, running laps she couldn't keep up with. It was just one night, she told herself. One bad decision. It didn't have to mean anything. But the way Damon had looked at her, that knowing smirk, like he'd seen this story unfold before, left a twist in her gut. And the worst part, she wasn't sure she'd seen the last of Elias Monroe. Something told her the night they shared was just the beginning. Naomi barely made it back to Lila's apartment in one piece. Her heels were a punishment, her dress still clung to her skin in all the wrong places, and her hair, once perfectly pinned, now looked like the aftermath of a wind tunnel. She didn't care. All she wanted was a shower, a moment to breathe, and maybe, if the universe was feeling generous, a do-over for the last 12 hours. Lila opened the door on the first knock, still in pajamas and holding a coffee mug. Her eyes widened immediately, followed by a devilish grin. Well, 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 she said, leaning on the doorframe. Look who didn't come home last night. Naomi shoved past her. Please, I'm begging you. Don't. Lila laughed, shutting the door behind her. No judgment. But also, spill. Who was he? Lila. Dark suit guy. Lila's eyes lit up. It was him, wasn't it? I knew it. That man had trouble written in Helvetica on his forehead. Naomi collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands. I don't know what I was thinking. Well, clearly you were thinking with something other than your brain. But honestly, you look like you needed it. I didn't need it. I needed rest. I needed to be responsible. I have work in... Naomi glanced at the clock and groaned. Oh my God. In 30 minutes. Lila bolted upright.
30 minutes!
Get in the shower.
I'll make coffee. Go, go, go!
Naomi scrambled to her feet and darted into the bathroom, trying to wash away both the scent of Elias and the fog of shame clinging to her skin. She brushed her teeth like her life depended on it, shoved her hair into a bun, and pulled on her most professional outfit, a white blouse tucked into a black pencil skirt. She kept telling herself that if she looked the part, maybe the rest would follow. The cab ride to the office was a blur. She barely registered the street signs, her mind still looping through every detail of last night, the way he'd kissed her, the way he'd looked at her like she was the only person in the room. And then Damon, tall, amused, unsettlingly observant. She felt like she'd wandered onto the set of a movie she wasn't supposed to star in. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was making a strong first impression at her new job. She needed this. She'd worked too hard to let one mistake ruin everything. The moment she stepped out of the cab and turned toward the entrance of Kingston Group's glass high-rise, she walked straight into a wall. Or at least, that's what it felt like. Strong hands caught her waist before she could fall back. Her breath hitched, and her eyes snapped up, only to lock onto a face she thought she'd left behind with last night's sunset. Elias Monroe. Careful, he said, steadying her with a ghost of a smile. Naomi stumbled backward, stunned. You? What? What are you doing here? Elias tilted his head slightly, his smirk deepening. I work here. She stared at him, unblinking. You work here. I do. And judging by your outfit and that panicked look in your eyes, I'd say, you do too. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. No, 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 no. This couldn't be happening. You're not just a manager or something, are you? She asked, her voice dry. He laughed softly. Not quite. Before she could speak again, a woman in a sleek gray suit approached with a clipboard. She asked politely. Naomi blinked. Yes. I'm Sylvia, executive assistant to Mr. Monroe. He's expecting you. She gestured toward the building, and Naomi followed numbly. Elias fell into step beside her, hands in his pockets like he had all the time in the world. Mr. Monroe. Her boss. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. As they walked into the elevator, Naomi fought the rising nausea in her throat. She didn't even hear Sylvia's brief overview of company structure or policy. All she could focus on was the man standing beside her, tall, calm, impossibly composed, and the memory of how his mouth had tasted only hours ago. This was not how first days were supposed to go. Not even close. The elevator doors slid open to the top floor, revealing a sleek, open space drenched in natural light. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a masterpiece. The hallway smelled of leather, fresh orchids, and something faintly citrus. Naomi followed Sylvia down a long corridor lined with abstract art and closed doors, her heels clicking too loud, her heart pounding even louder. Sylvia paused before a massive black door. Mr. Monroe prefers to give his assistants a personal walkthrough on their first day, she said, as if this was perfectly ordinary. She knocked once, then pushed it open. Mr. Monroe, your new executive assistant, is here. Naomi took a deep breath and stepped inside. Elias looked up from behind an expansive glass desk, his fingers resting casually on the keyboard. He wore a tailored navy suit today, no tie, the top button of his shirt undone, as if he couldn't be bothered by formality. His expression was unreadable, calm, composed, but with that familiar glint of amusement flickering just behind his eyes. Naomi, he said smoothly. Welcome to Kingston Group. She swallowed and forced a professional smile. Thank you, Mr. Monroe. The way she said it, so formal, so distant, made his lips twitch. Mr. Monroe, he repeated, leaning back slightly in his chair. We're doing titles now? Naomi stiffened, her grip tightening around the tablet in her hands. Sylvia, oblivious to the undercurrent in the room, handed Naomi a folder. Here's your schedule, passwords, and contacts. If you have questions, I'll be down the hall. Otherwise. She glanced at Elias, who waved a dismissive hand. I'll take it from here, he said. Sylvia nodded and left, closing the door behind her. And just like that, they were alone. The silence stretched. Naomi exhaled slowly. About last night? Let me stop you right there, Elias said, standing and walking around the desk with unhurried grace. You're here to work. I'm here to work. Whatever happened outside of this building has no bearing on what happens inside. Agreed. She blinked, thrown by the sudden professionalism. Agreed. Good, he said, leaning against the edge of the desk. Then let's move on. But he didn't move. Instead, he tilted his head, studying her with that same frustrating calm. You look tense, he said. I'm fine. You're not. You're bracing like I'm about to fire you. Well, Naomi said, lifting her chin, I did spend the night with my boss before knowing he was my boss. That's not exactly textbook onboarding. Elias chuckled, low and warm. I've never been much for textbooks. She gave him a tight smile, trying to ignore how his laugh settled in her chest like warm honey. I take my work seriously, she said. I hope that's clear. Crystal, he said, then with a wink. But I also find a little tension makes the day interesting. Naomi turned toward the door. Do you have any actual tasks for me? Or are we going to spend the morning testing the boundaries of her policy? He grinned. Feisty. I like it. She didn't reply, just stood straighter and waited. Elias finally pushed off the desk. All right. First task, coordinate my lunch meeting with the CFO. Reschedule the board briefing from Thursday to Friday. And cancel the interview with that PR firm. I've changed my mind. Naomi tapped everything into her tablet with precise, focused movements. She was determined to prove she was more than a mistake wrapped in silk sheets. Oh, he added over his shoulder, already walking back to his chair. And bring me a coffee, would you? Of course, she said. How do you take it? 3 sugar cubes, stirred exactly 7 times. She paused. 7? Not 6, not 8. 7. Naomi narrowed her eyes. You're messing with me. Elias looked at her, deadpan. Would I do that? She gave him a tight smile. I'll be back with your magical coffee. Outside his office, she leaned against the door for half a second, willing her heart to calm down. Then she headed to the break room, muttering under her breath. 7 times. What is he, a sorcerer? As she stirred his coffee, she counted aloud, just to be sure. 1, 2, 3. Oh no. By the time she brought it back, she was gripping the cup like it held her dignity inside. Elias took a sip, holding her gaze over the rim. Perfect, he said. Naomi crossed her arms. Anything else, Mr. Monroe? He leaned forward slightly. Yes. You're already my favorite assistant. She turned without a word and walked out. But she didn't miss the sound of his quiet laugh trailing behind her like a thread she wasn't sure how to cut. Naomi was beginning to learn that working for Elias Monroe was like playing chess with someone who refused to follow the rules, but still managed to win every time. The man was unpredictable in the most frustrating way. One moment sharp and professional, the next effortlessly charming and mildly infuriating. She'd been with the company barely a week, and already he had a file in her mind labeled, "Do not engage, may cause heart palpitations." It didn't help that he insisted on pulling her into random tasks that had nothing to do with her job description. That morning, he'd asked her to pick the color scheme for a client dinner. Yesterday, he'd summoned her into his office just to ask if the tie he was wearing looked too smug. He was impossible, and he knew it. That afternoon, Naomi found herself alone in the elevator, riding up from the lobby after running an errand. She had exactly 4 minutes before Elias's next meeting, and was mentally rehearsing the updated agenda when the doors slid open on the 15th floor. And in stepped Elias himself. He wore a black overcoat this time, his hair slightly tousled, as though he'd just walked off the cover of some luxury magazine. She took a tiny step to the side, trying to put polite space between them, but he didn't move farther in, just turned to face her. The doors closed. They stood in silence for 3 floors. You've been avoiding me, Elias said casually, not even looking at her. Naomi scoffed. I've been working. Same thing. She shot him a glare.
Not everything is about you, you know.
He finally turned his head, amusement dancing in his eyes. That's where we disagree. Naomi folded her arms.
Why do you do this?
Do what? This. Poke, prod. Stir things up. Elias leaned against the elevator wall, his posture relaxed, like he had all the time in the world. Because I like knowing what makes people tick. And me. What have you figured out so far? He studied her for a beat. You're better at this than you think. You pretend to be flustered, but you're already 10 steps ahead. You're stubborn, which I admire. And you hate the fact that you're still thinking about that night. Naomi felt heat rise in her cheeks. You are unbelievably arrogant. He took a step closer, closing the polite distance she'd fought to maintain. The air felt charged. And yet, he murmured, you haven't asked me to stop. Her heart thudded in her chest. She hated how right he was. Hated that every time he leaned in like this, her brain short-circuited. But more than anything, she hated that she couldn't tell if he was playing a game, or if he was just as drawn to her as she was just as drawn to her as she was to him. I left that night because it was a mistake, she said quietly. Elias's expression shifted. Just barely, I know. I didn't plan it. I didn't even know your last name. And now you do. Naomi shook her head. That doesn't make it less complicated. No, he agreed. It makes it more interesting. The elevator dinged, breaking the moment. Naomi stepped out quickly, needing air, needing space, needing him to stop looking at her like that. Elias stayed inside, letting the doors start to close, but right before they did, he called out, "You're not the only one who hasn't stopped thinking about it." And then he was gone, the elevator carrying him upward like some smug, well-dressed ghost. Naomi stood frozen in the hallway, the ache in her chest a mixture of adrenaline and confusion. She couldn't afford this, whatever this was. She had a job to keep, a reputation to build, a life she was finally beginning to control. But somehow, every time she told herself to be smart, Elias Monroe showed up and made her forget what smart even looked like. She wasn't falling for him. She refused to fall for him. But the cracks were showing, and Elias, damn him, had noticed. Naomi walked into the office building with a sense of dread heavy in her chest. The last week had been a blur of meetings, emails, and an unnerving tension that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. She had managed to keep her professional distance from Elias. But the subtle looks, the quiet words, the lingering moments, they were starting to pile up in her mind, building up like a storm that was waiting to break. She was just about to enter the elevator when a voice from behind made her stop. Naomi. She turned, her heart skipping a beat. It was Elias. Of course it was. He stood with that same commanding presence, dressed in his usual immaculate suit, his eyes dark and unreadable. But there was something in his expression today, something more intense than usual. Mr. Monroe, she said, trying to keep her tone even, to maintain the space between them. I'm on my way to a meeting. His gaze didn't waver. We need to talk. The words hung in the air between them, charged with a gravity that made Naomi hesitate. A part of her wanted to walk away, to ignore the pull of his presence and the memories of the night they had shared, but something in his eyes, something deeper, kept her rooted in place. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain calm, to play this game by his rules. Talk about what? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He stepped closer, just enough that Naomi could feel the heat of his body, the scent of his cologne enveloping her. She could have moved back, created more space between them, but she didn't. She stood there, frozen, as his eyes flicked to her lips, before meeting her gaze again. I know you're trying to avoid this, Elias said softly, his voice lower than usual, as if they were in a room where no one else could hear. But I'm not going to let you. You know that, don't you? Naomi's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to be angry, to push him away, but she couldn't deny the way his words made something inside her stir, the way he made her feel seen in a way that no one else had in years. "I'm not avoiding anything," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I'm just trying to keep things professional." Elias tilted his head, his gaze searching hers. "Are you?" he asked, his voice full of quiet challenge. "Because from where I'm standing, you've been avoiding me." She opened her mouth to protest, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The truth was, she was avoiding him. She'd been since that night, since the moment she'd slipped away from his apartment, her heart pounding in her chest and her mind racing with guilt and confusion. But why? Why couldn't she just let it go? "You don't want to admit it," Elias continued, stepping even closer now, "but you want this just as much as I do." Naomi's chest tightened. His words were too direct, too real. She wanted to argue, to shut him down, but instead she felt her defenses weakening. "No," she said, but it came out more as a breath than an assertion. "I don't want this. I don't want you." Elias didn't seem convinced. Liar. He reached out then, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture so simple, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. Naomi's pulse quickened. She should pull away. Tell him she couldn't do this. Tell him that their tangled emotions and unspoken desires couldn't be ignored anymore. But she didn't. Instead, she stood there, her hand in his, the world around her narrowing until there was only Elias, his warmth, his presence, his intensity, and the way it made her feel as though she was standing at the edge of a cliff, with nothing but the edge of a cliff, with nothing but the wind to catch her. "You can keep pretending," he said, his voice low and intimate, "but you and I both know the truth." Naomi wanted to say something, anything to break the tension, but before she could, the elevator dinged, the doors sliding open. The sudden noise pulled her out of the daze she'd fallen into, and she stepped back, pulling her hand away from his. "Mr. Monroe," she said, her voice returning to its professional tone, the wall coming back up. "I have work to do." Elias didn't stop her as she stepped into the elevator, but the last thing she saw before the doors closed was the slight smirk on his face, the look of someone who knew he had won. And Naomi, she couldn't stop thinking about what that victory really meant. The week had crawled by, dragging Naomi through long days of endless meetings and tedious administrative tasks. Each morning she found herself standing just outside Elias's office, trying to ignore the way his presence consumed her every thought. She had hoped that with time, the strange tension between them would fade. But if anything, it only seemed to grow stronger. His sharp looks across the conference table, his quiet observations when she least expected them. His quiet observations when she least expected them. And then, on Friday evening, after a particularly long and exhausting day, she found herself in a situation she'd managed to avoid until now. Elias had invited her out. A casual dinner, he'd said, just to discuss some ongoing projects. But Naomi knew better. It wasn't about work. It never was. She arrived at the restaurant early as usual, but it was already bustling with activity, the soft hum of laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. The dim lighting, the muted conversations, it was exactly the kind of place she had imagined. It was exactly the kind of place she had imagined Elias would choose. It was elegant, sophisticated, and a little too perfect for what they both knew was coming. Naomi sat at the bar, pretending to read through her notes on her phone, when she felt the unmistakable pull of his presence behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. The way the air shifted, the way the noise in the room seemed to fade, all signs pointed to Elias. "Am I late?" he asked smoothly, his voice just above a whisper. Naomi turned slowly to face him. He was dressed in a tailored black jacket, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to expose the sharp edge of his jawline. his eyes, as always, locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was effortlessly, impossibly handsome. And he knew it. She could see the subtle shift in his expression as he took her in, his gaze lingering just a fraction too long. "You're right on time," Naomi said, her voice betraying a hint of tension she couldn't hide. "But you didn't have to do this." Elias raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a small, amused smile. "Of course I did. You're not getting away that easily." She gave a soft half-laugh, trying to shake off the discomfort gnawing at her. "I'm not sure what you mean." He slid onto the stool beside her, his proximity making her uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. The bartender came over and he ordered them both a drink, an old-fashioned for him, a mojito for her, before returning his attention to Naomi. He wasn't looking at her as a colleague anymore. There was something more, something dangerous in the way his eyes darkened. "You know exactly what I mean," Elias said, his voice quiet, almost conspiratorial. "We both know why we're here." Naomi's heart skipped. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling the walls she had so carefully built start to crack. "We're here to talk about work." He laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "If you think that's why I asked you out tonight, you're either incredibly naive or you've been lying to yourself." Naomi opened her mouth to protest, but Elias cut her off with a look that sent a shiver down her spine. It was the kind of look that made her feel like he saw through every one of her defenses, like he knew the things she wasn't willing to admit. "We're both pretending, Naomi," he said, his voice dropping lower, almost a growl. "You're pretending you don't want this. And I'm pretending I don't want you." The words hung between them, charged with a raw, undeniable truth that Naomi couldn't ignore. For a moment, she forgot about the restaurant, the people around them, the entire world outside their bubble. All she could focus on was the steady thump of her pulse and the way her body responded to him, against every warning her mind had tried to impose. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Elias reached out, his fingers brushing against hers, just lightly enough to send a jolt through her. "Nothing about this has ever been right, Naomi. But that doesn't make it any less real." She pulled her hand back, shaking her head. "I'm not doing this." "You already are," Elias replied, his gaze unrelenting. "You just haven't admitted it yet." Naomi stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor, and Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. He was still watching her, the smirk still playing at the corners of his lips. She wanted to walk away, to leave, to escape this whirlwind of emotions and confusion, but she knew she couldn't. Not when the storm had already started. Naomi woke up the next morning with the taste of regret heavy on her tongue. The room was unfamiliar, cool light spilling in from a window she didn't remember passing, and her mind scrambled to put together the fragmented memories of the night before. She sat up slowly, the soft sheets slipping off her legs as she looked around. Everything was sleek, too perfect in a way that made her feel out of place. The pillows on the bed were perfectly arranged, the furniture minimalist but expensive, and yet there was something about it all that felt cold, distant, like it didn't belong to her. Her head throbbed with the remnants of the wine she'd drunk, but it wasn't just the alcohol that made her feel unsteady. It was the weight of the decisions she'd made, the ones she hadn't stopped to think about. Last night, that night, had been a blur of impulsive decisions, of letting her guard slip just for a moment, only to find herself tangled in a situation she never imagined. Elias. She squeezed her eyes shut. How had she let it happen? She knew better than to let herself be swept up in someone like him, someone who knew exactly how to push every button, Someone who knew exactly how to push every button. Someone who looked at her like he could unravel her with just a smile. But here she was, in his bed, with his scent lingering in the air and a new layer of complication added to her already chaotic life. She stood up quickly, trying to shake off the dizzying mix of emotions, and started to gather her things. Her dress was tossed over a chair, wrinkled from the night's events, and her heels were by the door, waiting. She slipped into them, silently cursing herself for getting into this situation. Just one drink, she had told herself. Just one. She had lied to herself. As she adjusted the strap of her bag, the sound of movement behind her froze her in place. Leaving so soon, Elias's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sending a shiver down her spine. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest as she found him leaning against the doorway, looking as composed as ever. His hair was tousled from sleep, his shirt slightly wrinkled, and yet he looked like he had all the time in the world. "I have to go," she said, her voice strained but firm, trying to hold on to the pieces of herself she felt slipping away. Elias didn't move, his gaze fixed on her. "I thought we were past the goodbyes already," he said, his tone smooth and inviting, but there was something darker lurking beneath it. "You don't have to leave like this." Naomi took a step back, her breath catching. She wasn't sure if it was the alcohol still swirling in her veins or the way Elias's presence seemed to pull her in. But she felt herself caught between wanting to flee and wanting to stay, wanting to pretend like everything could be easy, like last night didn't matter. But it did. It mattered more than anything. "I'm not doing this," she said, her voice more steady now, even though her hands were shaking. She couldn't stay here. Not like this. Not with him. Elias straightened up, his lips curling into a half-smile. "Not doing what, Naomi? Not doing this?" He gestured between the two of them, the space that had once been filled with laughter and heat now suffocating in its weight. She shook her head, feeling the anger welling up inside her. "This isn't just a mistake. It's more than that. I'm not." She stopped herself, realizing just how tangled her words were. "Not what?" Elias stepped closer, his presence dominating the room. "Not ready for what you really want. Because I've been reading you all night, and if you think you can walk away from this without thinking about it, about me, you're lying to yourself." Naomi took a breath, trying to steady herself, but the words had already slipped out before she could stop them. "I'm not ready to be another one of your games." For a moment, the amusement faded from his face, replaced by something more dangerous. "You think this is a game?" His voice lowered, the challenge in it sharp and unwavering. "You think I'm playing with you, Naomi?" She bit her lip, standing her ground. "Maybe not a game. But you don't get to decide how I feel." He stepped back, letting out a soft breath, and the tension in the room shifted. He was quieter now, almost contemplative. "You're right," he said. "I don't. But I'm not finished with you, Naomi. And I'm not going to make it easy for you to forget what happened between us." The words hung in the air, and Naomi could feel them pressing down on her, suffocating her resolve. She didn't know what he meant, didn't know how this was going to end. But one thing was certain, she wasn't walking out of this unscathed. As she reached the door, she turned back to face him one last time. "I'll deal with you later," she said, her voice steady, even though every part of her wanted to crumble. Elias stood by the bed, his arms crossed, his gaze unwavering. "I'll be waiting," he said softly. And with that, Naomi walked out, the weight of his words echoing in her mind long after she'd left his apartment behind. The days following Naomi's departure from Elias's apartment felt like a blur, each one dragging by with the weight of her own decisions pressing on her chest. Every time she walked into the office, the tension between them was palpable, thick in the air, like a storm waiting to break. She focused on her work, meeting schedules, client calls, managing Elias's chaotic calendar. But the moments when their paths crossed were becoming harder to ignore. By Friday afternoon, Naomi couldn't take it any longer. She'd been avoiding him for days, keeping herself busy with the endless stream of tasks. But it was becoming clear that she couldn't escape it. He was always there, just behind her, just around the corner, his presence too consuming to ignore. And she knew, deep down, he wasn't going to let her run forever. That afternoon, when she stepped into Elias's office with a report she'd finished for him, she found him standing by the window, staring out at the city below. His posture was relaxed, but there was something about the way he stood, something that told her he knew exactly what was coming. He turned as she entered, his eyes locking onto hers instantly, and Naomi felt that familiar pull in her chest, like gravity drawing her closer to him. "Naomi," he said quietly, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I've been waiting for you." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She had known this moment was coming, but nothing could have prepared her for the way it made her heart race. She began, but her words faltered as she saw the look in his eyes. There was no humor there, no teasing. Just something deep, something raw that she couldn't quite place. "You've been avoiding me," Elias said, his voice calm. But there was an edge to it now, a firmness that made her stomach tighten. "But we both know it's not working." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I don't know what you want from me, Elias." "I want you to stop running from this," he replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "From me. From us." The words were like a spark in the dark, igniting everything she'd been trying to bury. She took a step back, her body trembling with the force of everything she'd been holding inside. "I don't want to be another mistake," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "I don't want to be another one of your distractions." Elias's expression softened for a fraction of a second, but it quickly hardened again. "You think this is a mistake?" His voice dropped even lower, and Naomi felt the intensity of his words wash over her like a wave. "I don't do mistakes, Naomi. What happened between us? It wasn't a mistake. Not for me." Naomi's heart was pounding now, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. She wanted to turn away, to walk out of his office and never look back. But she couldn't. His words were like a thread pulling her in, drawing her closer, and she knew, deep down, that she hadn't been able to let him go. Not really. "I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice shaking. "I can't keep pretending that this is just business, that it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't matter. Because it does. It matters more than I want it to." Elias took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and Naomi felt her breath catch in her throat. He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth of his body, could see the intensity in his eyes. "It matters to me too," he said, his voice rougher now, raw with something she couldn't name. "I'm not asking you to pretend. I'm asking you to stop running. I'm asking you to face this." Her pulse was racing, her mind a whirl of conflicting emotions. She wanted to push him away, to maintain the distance she so desperately needed. But Elias was right there, his presence too strong, too consuming to ignore. "I'm not ready for this," she said, the words barely a whisper. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stood there, watching her with that same intensity that made her feel like she was being pulled under his spell. "Yes, you are," he finally said. "You've been ready all along. You just haven't admitted it yet." Naomi opened her mouth to protest, but the words died on her lips. She wanted to tell him no, to shut everything down, but Elias's hand was already reaching for hers, his touch gentle but sure. And in that moment, Naomi realized that she was done running. She had spent so much time trying to protect herself, trying to keep things safe, but there was no safety here, only the raw, unfiltered truth. "I'm not going anywhere," Elias said softly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "And I don't want you to either." Naomi's heart was still racing, but this time she didn't pull away. She didn't want to. The storm had finally broken, and she was right in the center of it. Naomi didn't sleep that night. Her mind was too busy, racing through every detail of what had happened earlier. Elias's words kept echoing in her head, his voice so calm, so sure. "You've been ready all along." The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. Everything about their connection, everything she'd been running from. She had been lying to herself, thinking she could keep things separate, that work and the feelings she had for Elias could remain neatly compartmentalized. But they couldn't. It was all tangled now, and she had no idea how to untangle it. She had avoided him for days after their conversation in his office. But avoidance could only last for so long. She knew she'd have to face him eventually, face the truth about what had been building between them. It was early in the morning when she stepped into the office, still reeling from the events of the previous night. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed too loud, the office too quiet. As she passed the receptionist, she kept her head down, not wanting to look anyone in the eye. She could already feel the familiar weight of Elias's presence in the air. He was here, in the building, waiting. She could feel it. When she reached her desk, she sat down quickly, opening her laptop and trying to focus on the tasks in front of her. But her mind kept drifting back to him. Elias, his eyes, his voice, the way he had touched her hand, his words lingering in the space between them, unspoken but understood. Naomi rubbed her temples, trying to shake the fog from her brain. She had promised herself she wouldn't think about him like this. She had made it through all the years before without letting someone like him mess with her head. But now it felt like she was slipping, like her own thoughts were betraying her. And then, as if summoned by her thoughts, the door to her office opened, and Elias walked in. He was dressed in his usual, impeccably tailored suit, his hair perfectly in place, looking as composed as ever. But there was something different in his eyes, unknowing, like he could read the storm inside her. Naomi didn't look up at first, her fingers still typing mechanically on the keyboard, but she could feel him standing there waiting. It was impossible not to. Finally, she lifted her gaze and met his eyes. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching her. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral, not letting him see the conflict roiling inside her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice smooth, calm, like they were picking up a conversation from the day before, "about what you said last night." Naomi didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a breath, trying to steady herself. "Elias, I'm not sure this is a good idea." "I don't," he interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. "Don't try to push this away again. You and I both know it's already past the point of no return." Her stomach twisted, but she didn't look away. "You're right," she said, her voice softer than she'd intended. "I've been avoiding this. I've been avoiding you." Elias took a step closer to her desk, the movement making Naomi's heart race again. "It's not just me you're avoiding, Naomi. It's us." He paused, his eyes darkening. "And I'm not going to let you do that anymore." Naomi's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a challenge, like a wall she was being forced to climb. She stood up from her desk, needing to create some space between them, to gather her thoughts. "I don't know what you want from me, Elias," she said, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts. "I don't know how to handle this. I can't just walk in here every day like nothing happened between us." Elias reached out, his hand brushing gently against her arm. You don't have to handle anything, Naomi. You don't have to have all the answers. All I'm asking is that you stop running from this. From us. His touch sent a shiver down her spine, and Naomi felt her resolve beginning to crack. She wanted to pull away, to tell him that this was too much, too fast. But she couldn't. She didn't want to. I'm scared, she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared of what this means. Elias stepped closer, his hand finding hers this time, warm and steady. Why, no. But we can face it together. We don't have to do this alone. Naomi looked up at him, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She didn't feel like she was running. For the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, this could be something worth fighting for. I'm not running anymore, she said, her voice steady with newfound determination. But I need you to promise me one thing. What's that? Elias asked, his thumb brushing against the back of her hand. Promise me, she said, taking deep breath, that we'll figure this out. Together. Elias smiled, a small, genuine smile that made her heart race again. I promise. And in that moment, Naomi knew that no matter what happened next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. The journey Naomi went through in this story teaches us a valuable lesson about vulnerability, trust, and the complexities of relationships. At the beginning, Naomi tried to avoid confronting her feelings, thinking she could keep them under control by shutting them out. However, as Elias's presence kept drawing her in, she was forced to confront the truth. Trying to avoid what's real only leads to more confusion and pain. The true lesson lies in how Naomi faced her fears, how she stopped running and allowed herself to open up, not just to Elias, but to the possibility of truly living without constantly holding back. Sometimes in relationships and life, we fear that being vulnerable means losing control, but in reality, it's the only way we can truly connect and grow. By acknowledging her feelings and trusting herself, Naomi found a sense of clarity and peace she hadn't anticipated. The story reminds us that embracing vulnerability doesn't weaken us, it empowers us. And most importantly, it teaches us that facing our truth, no matter how messy or complicated, is often the path to personal growth and the deep connections we seek. So, where are you watching from? If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more engaging and thought-provoking tales. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going.